Okay, hello and welcome everyone. For those of you who haven't been on my channel before, I usually do quite a few hair videos. I've done a couple like quarantine life videos, but I've now decided to do something a little bit different. It's going to be like hair and scandal, I guess. And there's one scandal that I've been following for many years now, and it's Seaworld. For those of you who don't know, Seaworld is basically this huge entertainment place that has all sorts of animals and things that you can do there. And so, as I said, yeah, I've been following it for a while, and it's basically about these beautiful killer whales that have been kept in captivity. But there's so many stories and a lot of information, so I won't be able to all fit it just in this one episode. I will have to split it up into quite a few. But I'm mainly going to start with one whale called Tilikum. Oh, and as I talk about him, I will be doing and creating quite an easy hairstyle that you might be able to follow along with as well. Okay, so as I said, there's a lot of information. So I've got my little book here. So if I look down randomly every now and again, it's because I'm trying to remember all of the information that there is available to me. Just a little disclaimer. I don't mean any offence to anyone that I talk about. I do apologise if I get some of the names wrong. I might not know how to pronounce the names, so I do apologise for that. And all the information that I have found is basically just collected from the internet. Okay, so as I said, we're going to start with Tilikum. He was captured in Iceland in 1983. Now I'll just talk a little bit about how they used to capture the whales back then. Not particularly nice. So how they would capture them and use them for entertainment. They would try and coax all of the whales into a smaller area. Now, how they decided to do that was actually put bombs in the water to try and move them in the area that they wanted. Not particularly nice. But don't forget that orcas, or killer whales, are highly intelligent animals. And so what the male adult whales decided to do was actually trick the boats and send them in a completely different direction, whilst the females and the young would actually swim underwater in a completely different direction. Now, this was working quite well until the aircraft actually saw the females, because obviously they've got to come up for air at some point, and the aircraft was able to notify the boats that they're in a completely different place, you need to go in this direction. So they dropped the nets around the mothers, and they basically just plucked out all of the babies that they wanted. Now, they did say that they would drop one side of the net to let the bigger ones out, but their babies had just been stolen from them, and so of course the mothers wouldn't go anywhere. But unfortunately that did mean that the remaining nets, they would get stuck in them and they would drown. So after they had taken the small ones that they wanted, in the nets would be left, these adult females. And there is a movie that came out in 2013, and it was called Blackfish, which I absolutely recommend watching. It's really gives you the whole backstory of everything and the kind of scandal and abuse that really goes on or went on back then. And you can actually, there's an interview with one of the men who would be on these boats going out and capturing these whales. And I think at the time he was quite young and he didn't really realise exactly what he was doing until he said he could hear the cries from these whales, that you're actually taking their children away from them. And then this is probably the most distressing part of it, when they found that these, 3 adult females had died and drowned. They were told to cut them open fill them with rocks, and even put anchors on their tails in order for them to sink. Even just trying to think of the concept of that is just awful. And the man that's being interviewed, you can see that it did affect him quite a lot. And also at that point, he didn't even wonder or think about whether it was illegal to be doing that. You know, you're sort of working for this big corporation and you probably think, well, I'm sure this is fine. Otherwise, they wouldn't be telling me to do it, right? No. But yes, it's definitely just trying to even think about doing that to an animal makes me feel really quite sick. So it was actually a year later, after he'd been captured, that he arrived at Sealand. It was called Sealand of the Pacific in Victoria, I think British Columbia. Now, when I saw photos of this, I wouldn't even call it an entertainment park. It looked quite bleak. It looked like they were just desperately trying to hold on and make some sort of money. And it just looked like a couple of pools, a few nets, a few buildings that said Sealand on it. And that was about it. So it was very small. Now, when he first was there actually on his own, the trainers said that he seemed really eager. He loved learning new tricks. He liked to please the trainers. And so he was doing quite well. But it's when they added in these other two females and they would then train them with Tilikum. But it also meant that if Tilikum did something wrong, they would both get punished. Both animals would get punished. So if they did something right, then they would be rewarded with food. So it was constant sort of reward and punishment and reward, which meant if they did quite a few things wrong, then they would, you know, not get food. And obviously this caused a lot of friction between Tilikum and the other two females. And so they actually bullied him. And one way they would do that is they would rake him. Basically, their teeth, they would rake along his skin, which, you know, I'm sure would be very painful. And the most sad part is at night time, they would be put into, it looked like a metal box, and they would all be in there together, completely dark. So can you imagine having two bullies that you really hate and you're locked in a room at night time with them? Well, of course, the bullying is going to carry on. And some of the trainers said it was awful in the morning when they would see Tilikum, you know, with new rake marks all over his body. And so you can see the annoyance and the fact that I'm sure one day this whale is going to snap. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happened. And his very first victim would be Kelty Byrne in 1999. Now, she actually worked at Sealand just part-time. And it was after a show. She was just walking past the pool and her foot slipped. She went into the water, and just as she was pulling herself up, that's when she was dragged underneath. Now, also in the movie The Blackfish, there were two witnesses that they interviewed, and they said that she would be pulled under and then taken to the surface, pulled under, and this repeated basically until this poor young girl was drowned. And the very odd part is the fact that there wasn't even a lawsuit for this incident, because they managed to pass it off as being an accident, that she had simply slipped and she had drowned, and that maybe the whales, you know, after she had drowned were sort of flailing around and playing with her or something, because they also couldn't really find out exactly what whale pulled her underneath, if that was supposed to be the story. But the two witnesses said they know exactly which whale it was. it was the bigger one. And they also know exactly which one it was because of the collapsed dorsal fin, which happens with every single male adult whale in captivity. So they knew without a doubt that it was Tilikum who pulled her underneath. But interestingly, they were never called, they were never interviewed or asked about, what they saw. Now, at this point, I think Sealand was thinking, yeah, probably time to shut the doors and close. But before they did, they thought, well, we've got some very expensive whales here, so, we'll make a bit of money on the way out. And at this point, Seaworld, this huge, big entertainment park, had heard that Tilikum was for sale, and they got really excited. I don't know about you, but I would be thinking, whoa, hold on, an accident happened there. Let's really look into it and make sure that, any of the whales, especially Tilikum, wasn't actually involved and it was definitely an accident. But that went straight over them, and they decided, no, he's going to be a great breeder, so we will buy him. So it was actually in 1992 that he arrived. And again, right from the beginning, he was bullied from the other whales that were there. And of course, the other females were smaller and more agile. And of course, Tilikum wasn't. He was pretty big, and so he couldn't get away as easily. Not to mention he's in a tank anyway, it's a little bit more difficult. But he again would start being raked along his skin to the point where it would break the skin and he would be bleeding. And he would have horrible large gashes all over him. It's just painful, sore and sad to see. And, even the interviews with some of the trainers there, they said eventually we sort of knew the abuse and the things that were going on. And one of them even said, I stayed because I wanted to look after Tilikum. I wanted to make sure that he was okay, and the only way I could do that was to keep coming back each day. Now, you also have to remember that all the whales in there, they haven't just been taken from one place. They've been taken from completely separate nations, and they're basically shoved together. So, they're going to be acting differently, speaking a completely different language, the way they communicate, completely different culture, and yet they're all expected to get on. So as I said, Tilikum was bullied, but that wasn't the only aggression. It was between all of them. And I remember there was a live show, and it was one of the females that had been raked so badly that she had 2 gashes on the side of her. And she had gotten herself up onto the viewing platform, which is basically where the whale can come completely out of the water on this viewing platform for everyone to see before they wiggle themselves back into the water. But obviously this time she was there for quite a while because she had, been injured. And it was completely on show, the fact that this poor whale was bleeding. And it was really distressing also when she managed to get herself back into the water, that she just sort of left this trail of blood behind her, which of course tainted the entire show. But then also, you begin to think, well, hang on, are these whales being looked after? This is what they're doing to each other. There must be something that you can do about it. And this is what's so terrifying, is that nothing was. And it makes me feel sick to the stomach that I gave money to them. Well, my parents did. I went on holiday when I was 9 years old, and we went to, I think it was the Shamu show. And back then, I was young and I was like, oh, this is so exciting. It's entertainment and these beautiful animals, the fact that they can be trained to do all these fantastic tricks. And obviously, me being naive back then, I thought that every couple of years they would swap over. They would be let into the wild and another 2 would come and train just for a few years, and they would keep doing that. And wasn't until much, much later I realised that the animals, most of them were there for their entire life. Also, their lifespan is similar to a human's. And this is also what's quite embarrassing, that the trainers were told completely different or wrong facts about these whales. And of course, you know, all the customers there would, well, you wouldn't question it because someone working at Seaworld has told you about these whales. Well, of course they would have looked it up and gotten their facts correct, but they hadn't. So quite a few of the trainers you can hear are like, oh yes, about 25 to 30 years is their lifespan. Whereas actually it can be 60, 70 or even 80 years. And also the fact they said, oh, I think it's 25% of adult males will have a collapsed dorsal fin in captivity and the wild. Whereas actually there's only 1% where that happens in the wild. But every male that's in captivity, adult, will have a collapsed dorsal fin. So it's just some of these embarrassing facts that, you know, they've gotten wrong, or to be honest, they were probably told to say this, you know, and they didn't really know any better. What's really sad is a lot of whales in captivity have died from the aggression of other whales. I think it was in San Diego in 1989, just after a show. One of the whales was obviously very angry and rammed into the other whale and broke its jaw, and it basically bled out in this pool. You can actually, I think they show a clip of it in Blackfish. I do warn you, it's actually a lot more distressing than you think it's going to be. Also because you can hear the whale making noises and you know that it's in pain. And obviously it's leaving this trail of blood in the pool whilst this other whale is just kind of watching it. It's really horrible. It's really horrible. And so, you know, this is the type of thing that has been going on for years. And they don't have enough pools, obviously, to split up all of them. So at some point, 2 or 3 or even 4 are going to have to be together. Now, there's one thing, sorry, I forgot to mention. Going back to Sealand, the small one that was a bit run down, they didn't have an option to keep Tilikum separate. As I said, they were all together in this sort of metal box. And sometimes, especially in the winter, they wouldn't be out for many hours during the day. And sometimes they would put them in the metal box at 5 p.m. and they wouldn't come out again until 10 a.m. the following morning. So if you can just think about how many hours he was in that box with those 2 females who bullied him the entire time, I think, you know, that is what caused his mental state to completely break down and which ultimately led to these deaths. Okay, so Tilikum's next victim was to be Daniel Jukes in 1999. Now, people say that he was a drifter. You know, I don't think he had like a permanent address, moved around a lot, and perhaps had a few mental issues. And some people say that he broke into Seaworld during the nighttime. But I think the security there is pretty tight. So some people think that he just stayed after hours, hid somewhere, you know, and then came out at nighttime, because he was actually found in the morning on the top of Tilikum's back, completely naked. And it seemed like he was perhaps parading this man around in the pool. The story that they tried to spin was that the man died of hypothermia. Now, I don't know how cold a swimming pool can get in the winter, but it's probably not quite as freezing as, you know, as the ocean. But that's the story that they ran with for quite a while. But it was actually the medical examiner who gave a few more graphic details, which are said in this movie, Blackfish. But I won't go into too many. But there were definitely bite marks pretty much all over his body. So it was fairly obvious that, you know, it wasn't just hypothermia, if that was even true to begin with. But it just seems, maybe, I don't know, maybe he was a little bit drunk or something and wanted to have a swim with a whale. But, you know, I think he just definitely shouldn't have gone into that tank. That was probably the worst one to be going into. So, you know, now this is the second death that Tilikum is involved in. So again, at this point, I think I'd be thinking, right, what's going on? Maybe we need to be looking into this a bit more. But no, Tilikum was still performing and trainers were still getting in the water with him, because obviously the trainers at that point, oh, well, you know, that was an accident. They didn't even hear about the accident in Sealand. They knew absolutely nothing about it, you know, and that's what is really so difficult to swallow, because I feel so sorry for those trainers that were told certain things, but you know, they also kept so much from them as well. But usually, if they don't get rid of a threat in life, it seems to be because of money. And that's exactly why they kept Tilikum. Is actually he was one of the main breeders in Seaworld. And actually it worked out that 50% of the genes in Seaworld were from Tilikum. But you also think, why would you want his genes if he has shown aggression towards humans? And to me that seems very bizarre. Now, I remember when I went to Seaworld and I did think, wow, you know, what an amazing job to be a trainer for these beautiful orcas. I bet though you've got to go through extensive training. It was interesting when you listen that they didn't. You know, they needed a keen interest in orcas and training killer whales. And that was kind of it. So it just shows you the kind of lack of care that was taken to build this industry up. But then you think, if you did employ someone who knew all about orcas, they would probably think, I'm not going to get into the water. You know, they should be left alone. They should be in the wild, left alone. So what's the best alternative is to pick up these, you know, hungry people who are willing to put in the crazy hours in order to have a dream job. So I completely understand, you know, that it was very exciting for them to begin with. And they probably thought that they were bonding with these beautiful creatures. And in a way they probably were, but ultimately in the end, you know, they realised that they don't belong to anyone. And even though we're training them, you know, it's difficult to say that, you know, they're friends, because they are a food source. They do something correct and they will get food. And what's quite interesting is, even though, you know, they are called killer whales, there's actually been no record of a killer whale killing a human in the wild. So that just shows you that not only these very intelligent creatures, but they're actually very friendly. I've seen copious amounts of videos online where these beautiful orcas have, you know, swam up to a boat and they've popped their head out, and you've seen people touching their nose and they're communicating as well, and just never really shown any aggression towards humans. So it just shows you the lives that these poor killer whales, you know, have had to go through. Well, no wonder you would be frustrated and angry and willing to snap at some point. Now, I'm going to talk about Tilikum's third and final victim, in the next episode. I'm going to try and upload these as often as possible. It might be every 2 weeks, it might be every 3 weeks. We shall see. I wish this was my full-time job, but it's not at the moment. So I will come back with lots more information for you. I hope you enjoyed that. As I said, before I upload the next one, feel free to watch Blackfish because it is absolutely fascinating to watch. But I will also put some links down below of different articles where abuse has happened, or perhaps a trainer has been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and a couple of like scandals and things like that for you to have a look through and get a better idea of the entertainment world for these beautiful orcas. Okay, well, until next time, I hope you enjoyed that, and bye.